Okay, so now let's try to understand the concept of beans and application context. Now, in our previous example, we have all these classes and the way they depend on one another. So the functionality of people controller depends on the existing of people service, and the people service depends on the existing of people DAO. And for us, in the main method to call the get people from people controller, we need to add all these objects and all the dependencies on which the objects rely on. Now, what happens if, let's say that this example, it's a Spring application. So when a Spring application is launched, behind the scenes, Spring launches something called an application context. Now you can imagine this just an object, and basically this is what it is. Just imagine an object, and this object will go and add all the necessary objects in your Spring application and add them in this particular class. So in our example, you have like a class application context, and this class will contain, just over simplification, all these three classes and their respective objects. So behind the scenes, Spring will do something like this. I repeat, this is an oversimplification, but it's just for you to understand. So you have just a class with the name of application context, and behind the scenes, Spring will create all of your objects based on your classes, and it will inject all the necessary dependencies on which every object relies on. And then your main method will look something like this. So as you can see, you don't care about all these dependencies because they are being handled by Spring. So you only care about your business logic, so your method. This is what Spring dependency injection and inversion of control means. What inversion of control means? Inversion of control means that Spring manages the creation of objects for you, and Spring dependency injection means that Spring manages the dependency on which these objects rely on. So in our example, Spring is the one who creates these objects for you based on the configuration on which you applied. So this is inversion of control, and dependency injection is that Spring creates all the necessary dependency for your objects. So people controller, to have a people controller, it will create a people service, and to have a people service, it will create a people DAO, and so on. Now I repeat, this is just an oversimplification, but we will see this in examples. But now it's just for you to understand the concept of dependency injection and inversion of control and the application context. So application context basically is like an object that stores all the necessary objects in your application. Now what are beans? Beans basically are objects that are being handled by Spring. So you can imagine that people DAO, it's a bean, people service, it's a bean, people controller, it's a bean. So bean is a simple object, but not just a simple object, that is being registered in the application context. So for example, when Spring fires an application context, it will add all the necessary beans that belong to Spring. So all these classes which have been registered to Spring will create all these objects and will add all your beans which you have registered. And for this, let me go to my application, and we see here when we have run that when Spring fires, all these beans that we have logged to the screen with this method, we see here that we get the application context and we get all the bean definition names. All these names are objects that have been created by Spring when we have launched the application. So for example, if you see here, this is the name of your class that you have here. So when Spring have created, when you have started the application, Spring has created an object for you, and you can use this object in your application. Now we will discuss in future videos how we can create our own beans, how we manage the dependency, but for now, just to understand these two simple things. beans are objects that are being registered in the application context by Spring. An application context is basically the large, let's say a large object. I mean, it's just an object that stores all the objects that have been registered by Spring, the ones that have been added, defaulted by Spring. So this one, the internal configuration of data processor and so on, and the ones that you will add manually. And this process is called inversion of control because Spring manages the objects for you, and dependency injection is the step where Spring will create the objects and all the necessary dependents. But this we'll learn more in depth in future videos. So that's all.